Dark clouds loomed over the skyline of the city as the iconic glass headquarters of the century-old automobile giant glistened under the fading evening sun, its polished steel facade unable to hide the weight of the storm gathering within its walls. A storm not of nature but of scandal, deception, and a future on the brink of collapse. For decades, the company had stood as a towering symbol of engineering brilliance, producing machines that roared across highways and whispered luxury into the ears of millions. But behind that glossy marketing and decades of trust, cracks had begun to form. Cracks no one dared to acknowledge publicly, cracks that would soon shatter the foundation of an empire. Inside the boardroom on the 47th floor, tension hung so thick it could be sliced with a blade. Richard Hamilton, the charismatic yet secretive CEO whose signature charm had saved the company from ruin 10 years ago, now sat with his eyes fixed on a single confidential document marked in bold red letters. Internal investigation, strictly confidential. His fingers drummed nervously on the mahogany table as he glanced around at the familiar faces of the executive team. Faces he once trusted but now doubted. Faces pale with dread as if they too sensed that the end of an era was near. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard finally spoke, his deep voice trembling ever so slightly, "what you're about to hear must never leave this room." There was a shuffle of discomfort among them. Emily Carter, the company's brilliant but blunt chief financial officer, adjusted her glasses, her sharp blue eyes narrowing as if she already knew what was coming. Beside her, Michael Reynolds, head of global operations, clenched his jaw, silently praying the rumors swirling in hushed tones across the company's corridors were just that, rumors. Richard's hand shook as he slid the document across the table, and as the executives leaned in, their eyes widened in collective horror. Massive financial discrepancies, hidden losses masked by creative accounting, and whispers of a dangerous cover-up involving a line of vehicles that were never supposed to reach the roads. Vehicles with a fatal flaw that could ignite engines into balls of fire under certain conditions. A flaw deliberately concealed from regulators and consumers to save billions in recall costs. For years, the company had thrived on the illusion of perfection, promising safety and sustainability while secretly cutting corners to outpace competitors. And now that illusion was crumbling like a sandcastle against a rising tide.
Emilie's voice sliced through the silence. "Richard, is this real? Tell me this is some elaborate worst-case scenario analysis."
But Richard could only lower his head, the weight of guilt bending his once proud posture, as he whispered, "It's worse than real, Emily. It's already happening." Across the table, Michael's heart pounded like a war drum as memories flashed of assembly lines in overseas plants where he'd noticed irregularities, shortcuts in materials, safety protocols ignored, all in the name of speed and profit. He had raised concerns, yes, but they had been brushed aside with reassurances and bonuses that silenced his conscience. And now here they were, sitting in a skyscraper that symbolized success while the ground beneath them rotted with corruption. The stakes were higher than anyone imagined. Lawsuits worth billions, criminal investigations looming, stock prices poised to plummet like a burning meteor, and millions of loyal customers unknowingly driving ticking time bombs on four wheels. But what truly terrified Richard wasn't just the scandal. It was the letter that had arrived anonymously 2 days ago, a letter that simply read, "I know what you did. The world will know too." He had dismissed it as a hoax at first, until an encrypted email followed, containing internal memos no outsider should ever have had access to. Someone somewhere had breached their fortress of secrecy, and that someone was ready to unleash hell. As the city lights flickered on in the distance, Richard knew the coming days would decide not just the fate of the company, but of everyone in this room, because when an empire falls, it buries its architects in the rubble. And as thunder rumbled in the distance, a sinister thought clawed at the edges of his mind. The enemy isn't outside these walls, it's sitting at this very table. Outside the towering building, raindrops began to streak down the glass, as if the heavens themselves sensed the chaos brewing inside. Far below on the street, pedestrians hurried past, oblivious to the fact that history was about to be rewritten by the decisions made in that very room. Richard tightened his grip on the edge of the table, his knuckles white, and let out a slow breath. "We have one chance to contain this before it explodes," he said, his tone grave. Emily leaned forward, her sharp features hardening into determination.
"And how do you propose we do that? Richard?
You think you can just bury this? This is a wildfire. You can't put it out with a bucket of water." Richard's gaze flickered to her, his eyes dark with secrets. "Not bury it. Redirect it." The words hung like smoke, curling ominously in the air. Michael spoke up, his voice tight with fear.
"Redirect it?
To what? Who do you think we can blame for this without burning down the entire company?" Richard's jaw tightened, and for a brief moment, silence fell, broken only by the rhythmic hum of the city below. Finally, he said, "We'll start with the overseas plants. We frame it as a rogue operation, claim they acted without authorization. Sacrifice a few heads to save the body." Emily's chair scraped harshly against the floor as she stood, her anger flaring.
Are you insane?
Do you think regulators, do you think the public will buy that? This isn't some minor accounting glitch, Richard. People could die because of this flaw. People probably already have.
Richard's voice cracked like a whip.
Do you think I don't know that? His shout reverberated across the polished walls, startling even himself. He sank back into his chair, rubbing his temples as if trying to massage away the enormity of the disaster.
You think you wanted this?
You think I planned for this? No, but if we don't control the narrative now, everything we've built will turn to ash.
Outside, lightning split the night sky, illuminating the distant hills like jagged scars.
And deep inside Richard's mind, a memory stirred. A secret meeting 3 years ago with a man named Victor Kane, a shadowy consultant who had promised shortcuts to dominance in the electric vehicle market. Shortcuts that now felt like a deal with the devil. Victor's words echoed like a curse. You want to lead the future? Then burn the rulebook. And Richard had burned it, all right, and now the flames were licking at his heels. We need Kane, Richard muttered under his breath, and Emily froze. What did you just say? He looked up, his eyes cold steel.
Victor Kane.
He's the only one who can clean this mess. He's resourceful. Emily's lips curled in disgust.
Resourceful?
He's a fixer, Richard. The kind of man who makes problems disappear by making people disappear. Michael swallowed hard, his throat dry as sandpaper. He had heard the rumors too, about whistleblowers who vanished without a trace, about journalists whose careers mysteriously imploded after digging too deep. Was this what they had become? A company that silenced truth with blood money and fear? Before he could speak, Richard's phone buzzed on the table, slicing through the tension like a blade. He glanced at the screen and felt the blood drain from his face. The message was short, chilling. Tick-tock, Richard.
The world is watching.
Attached was a photo of his daughter, Claire, stepping out of her college dorm. Richard's hand trembled as he gripped the phone, his mind spiraling into darkness. Whoever this was, they weren't just after the company. They were after him.
What is it?
Emily asked, her voice softer now, but Richard couldn't answer. He stood abruptly, the chair toppling behind him, and strode to the window, staring at the rain-streaked city lights as dread clawed at his insides. Somewhere out there, an enemy lurked, an enemy who knew too much, who had nothing to lose and everything to gain by tearing them apart. And as Richard Hamilton stared into the storm, he realized with bone-deep certainty, this wasn't a battle for the company anymore. This was a war for survival. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the rain pounding against the windows, a relentless drumbeat echoing the chaos inside Richard's mind. Emily's fingers tightened around his arm, her voice low and urgent. Richard, listen to me, this isn't just blackmail. Whoever's doing this doesn't want money, they want to burn everything down. You can't play by their rules. But Richard shook her off, his face carved in stone. There are no rules anymore. He strode toward the door, but before he could leave, the lights flickered and died, plunging the skyscraper into darkness. Gasps erupted as emergency lights bathed the room in a sickly red glow, casting long distorted shadows across the walls like demons dancing on the edge of sanity.
What the hell? Michael's voice cracked in the eerie gloom.
Backup power should have kicked in by now. Emily grabbed her phone, but the screen remained black. No signal.
No Wi-Fi. It Richard like a punch in the gut.
This wasn't a blackout. This was a message. They weren't just being watched, they were being hunted.
Somewhere in the darkness, a faint click echoed. The sound of a lock, or a gun. The security guard outside, gun silent.
Richard's instinct screamed at him, the primal voice of survival rising above the corporate veneer. Stay together, he ordered, his voice hard. Nobody leaves this room. But before anyone could respond, the massive double doors creaked open with a slow, agonizing groan. A figure stepped into the crimson light, rain dripping from his trench coat, a fedora casting a shadow over his face. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then he spoke, his voice smooth as silk and twice as deadly.
Richard.
Long time.
Richard Brisichd. Kane.
The name rolled off his tongue like poison. Emily's heart plummeted. Victor Kane wasn't a ghost anymore. He was flesh and blood, standing in their war room like the angel of death.
What do you want?
Richard growled, though he already knew the answer. Kane's smile was a razor's edge.
What have you always wanted?
Balance.
You've tipped the scale too far, Richard.
Time to even them. He took a step forward, the dim light catching the glint of something metallic in his hand. A sleek, silenced pistol that seemed to absorb the crimson glow. Gasps rippled through the room as Michael instinctively moved in front of Emily, his pulse thundering in his ears. Kane chuckled, low and cold. Relax.
If he wanted you dead, you'd be cooling on the floor by now.
I'm here to offer Richard a choice. He tossed something onto the table.
A flash drive, black and gleaming like a shard of night.
Every file, every memo, every dirty little secret this company has tried to bury, is right here. In 48 hours, it goes public, unless Richard does exactly what I say. Richard's jaw clenched so hard it ached.
And Claire.
Kane's grin widened. Safe. For now. But you know the rules of this dance, old friend. One wrong step, he mimed a gunshot to the head. Rage and terror collided inside Richard, but he forced his voice steady.
What do you want, Kane?
Money? Power?
Kane's eyes glittered with something darker than greed. Redemption. Not your, mean.
You burned me, Richard. 3 years ago, you promised me a seat at the table, and instead, you tossed me to the wolves.
Do you know what it's like to claw your way out of a grave sommeonnel's duke for you?
His voice rose, each word a blade.
He built you empire, and you left me to rot.
Richard's stomach churned. He remembered that day vividly, the merger that almost killed the company, the desperate deals, the bodies buried under NDAs. Kane had taken the fall, disappeared into the shadows, and now the shadows had come home.
Emilie's voice cut through the tension. Victor, listen.
Whatever grudge you have with Richard, dragging the company into this, destroying thousands of jobs, what does that get you? Kane turned to her, his smile gone. Justice.
And maybe a little entertainment.
He pocketed the gun with a casual grace that made it even more terrifying. You have 48 hours, Richard.
You'll be in touch.
And with that, he melted back into the darkness like a phantom, leaving behind the echo of his threat and a room full of ghosts. The doors slammed shut, and the lock clicked, sealing them in a tomb of fear. Richard sank into his chair, his hands trembling as he stared at the flash drive on the table, a tiny piece of plastic that could topple an empire. Emily picked it up, turning it in her fingers like a live grenade. If this gets out, she whispered, we're finished. Richard's voice was hollow. We were finished the moment he walked in. The room felt smaller now, suffocating, as if the walls themselves were inching closer with every passing second. The crimson glow of the emergency lights bathed their faces in a hellish hue, reflecting the reality of the abyss they were all staring into. Richard sat motionless, his eyes fixed on the flash drive like it was a venomous snake coiled to strike. Emily paced, her heels clicking against the polished floor, a rhythm of growing agitation. Michael leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his mind a storm of fear and calculations. 48 hours. 48 hours to save a company worth billions, a daughter who had never asked for this, and reputations that had taken lifetimes to build. Emily stopped pacing, turning on Richard with a glare sharp enough to cut steel. You should have told me about Kane, she snapped. If I'd known. If you'd known what? Richard shot back, his voice raw. That I made a deal with the devil to keep this company alive? That everything we've built since the merger was born out of that deal. He slammed his fist on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. You think I'm proud of that? Emily flinched but didn't back down. Pride isn't the issue, Richard.
Survivalist.
And right now, we're all hanging by a thread because of a mistake you made 3 years ago. Michael interjected, his voice taut with tension. Arguing isn't going to save us. We need a plan.
Richard logged a hollow, broken sound that made Emilie's skin crawl.
A plan? Kane has the files, Michael. Everything, the safety flaws, the cooked books, the payoffs to regulators. If that flash drive goes public, we're done. Not just the company, All of us. Criminal charges, prison, maybe worse. Emily froze mid-step, her eyes narrowing. Unless, Richard looked up sharply. Unless what? She hesitated, her mind racing ahead of her words. Unless we get the files back.
Destroy them.
If Kane's the only one with access, he's not, Richard cut in. He said he'd leak them. That means he's got backups. Multiple backups. Even if we get the drive, he could still nuke us with a click. Emily's jaw tightened. Then we find the backups. We find where he's storing them, and we burn it all. Michael stared at her like she'd lost her mind. You're talking about going to war with Victor Kane. Do you have any idea who we're dealing with? That man makes sharks look like goldfish. People disappear around him, Emily. Not rumors, people. Emily met his gaze without flinching. And if we do nothing, we disappear too, into a courtroom or a grave.
Pique your poison.
Richard's phone buzzed again, slicing through the argument like a blade. He snatched it up, his heart lurching when he saw the message. Check your email. He sprinted to his laptop, hands shaking as he typed in his credentials. The screen flickered to life, revealing an email with a single attachment, a live video feed.
Claire.
Still blindfolded, still tied to the chair. But this time there was something new, a red digital clock behind her, counting down from 48 hours. The bastard had turned it into a game. Emily's hand flew to her mouth as the reality hit. This wasn't just corporate blackmail anymore. This was psychological warfare, designed to break them piece by piece. Richard's voice was a rasp as he whispered, "If I don't deliver in 48 hours, he kills her." The words hung in the air like the tolling of a death knell. Then Michael's phone buzzed. He frowned, pulling it out, and froze. A text from an unknown number. You can still save yourself. Call this number.
Donne tel Richard.
His blood ran cold. He glanced up, his gaze flicking to Richard, then Emily. Did they get one too? Or was he the only one Kane was tempting? He slipped the phone back into his pocket, his mind spiraling into a labyrinth of fear and temptation. Maybe Kane was right. Maybe it was every man for himself now. And as Michael stood in the shadow of the boardroom, a dark seed took root in his heart, the kind that grows into betrayal. Michael felt sweat trickle down his spine as the weight of the message burned into his mind like a brand.
You can still save yourself.
The words looped over and over, a poisonous whisper in the cavern of his thoughts. He kept his expression neutral, hiding the storm brewing behind his eyes as Richard slammed his laptop shut with a force that rattled the table. We move now, Richard said, his voice hard, commanding.
Émilie, Pulevry Filon Kane.
Every deal, every contact, every cent we paid him. If he wants a war, we'll give him one. Emily nodded stiffly, but doubt flickered in her eyes like a candle fighting the wind. She knew Richard, knew the man behind the tailored suits and practiced charisma. When pushed to the edge, he was dangerous. But Kane wasn't some corporate rival. He was a phantom with a taste for blood, and going after him was like stepping barefoot into a nest of vipers. Richard turned to Michael.
Get security on the line. You want eyes on every floor, every exit.
No one gets in or out without my say-so. Michael swallowed hard, nodding, but inside, his mind screamed. Security?
Against Kane?
That was like building a paper wall to stop a hurricane. He stepped out of the room, phone in hand, dialing the number Kane had sent. Each ring pounded like a drum in his chest until a voice answered, smooth, calm, and chilling. Michael, the voice said, not asking, just stating, like it already knew him down to his bones. You did well. Michael's throat tightened.
What do you want from me?
A low chuckle flowed through the speaker, rich and cold as winter.
What everyone wants.
Freedom. Safety. Survival. You help me, and I make sure you walk away clean. No prison. No scandal.
No blood on your hands.
You'll be the hero who tried to stop the fire. Michael's voice dropped to a whisper.
And Richard.
Richard, Kane said, savoring the name like a bitter wine, made his choice years ago. Now he pays the price. Michael closed his eyes, the weight of loyalty and fear crushing him from both sides. What do you need? The answer was a blade dipped in honey. Access. The company servers. The internal communications hub.
You want everything. You have until midnight. The line went dead, leaving Michael standing in the dim hallway, his pulse hammering like a war drum.
He slid the phone back into his pocket and took a deep breath, trying to steady the tremor in his hands. When he returned to the boardroom, Emily shot him a sharp look.
Everything okay? Michael forced a tight smile.
Yeah.
Sécurité est son hit.
He sat down, his mind screaming with the weight of the lie. Emily turned back to Richard, who was pacing like a caged tiger, muttering strategies under his breath. She watched him closely, her mind spinning its own wheels. Richard was unraveling. She could see it in the twitch of his jaw, the glassy sheen in his eyes. And when leaders break, they take everyone down with them. Emily wasn't about to let that happen. Not to her. Not after everything she'd sacrificed for this empire. She slipped her phone out under the table and began typing, her fingers flying with silent desperation. If Richard thought he was the only one who could play this game, he was dead wrong. She was going to find Kane before Richard did, and cut her own deal. Meanwhile, far across the city, Victor Kane lounged in a leather chair inside the abandoned warehouse where Claire sat tied and blindfolded.
The dim light from a single engine bulb cast a monstrous shadow across the cracked concrete floor.
Kane's men, two hulking figures with faces carved from stone, stood silently by the door, their eyes cold, their hands resting on holstered weapons. Kane sipped his whiskey, his gaze fixed on the live feed from the boardroom playing on a sleek tablet. He smiled, slow and serpent-like, as he watched the seeds of doubt bloom in Michael's eyes, the spark of rebellion flicker in Emily's. Humans, he murmured, swirling the amber liquid in his glass.
So prédictable.
He leaned forward, typing a quick command into his tablet. The screen split into two feeds, one showing the boardroom, the other a new location, a dimly lit bar where a journalist sat nursing a drink, oblivious to the storm about to crash through his life.
Kane smiled with air.
Let's give the press something to chew on. He hit send, and across the city, a phone buzzed on a sticky bar counter. The journalist glanced at the screen, his eyes widening as he opened the anonymous email. His pulse quickened as he scrolled through the leaked memos, the damning evidence of corruption and cover-ups. His hands shook as he realized what he was holding, enough to topple an empire. And as lightning split the sky outside, the first crack in the fortress of Richard Hamilton's world began to spread.